If you're living in any one of the wealthy capitalist countries of the world, you'll have heard of food poverty too. Now, that may seem like an oxymoron, wealth and food poverty coexisting in the same space, but it is exactly the greed of the capitalist system for the few which creates poverty for the many. Let's examine why. Well, first, we need to understand capitalism. Now, I'm not about to do that here because, well, it's a deep subject, and I've got some videos on capitalism and some other videos on food poverty, and you'll find these by subscribing to my channel, That Sociologist. So for us here, welcome. We'll be looking at food insecurity and its link to food bank use. Now, for younger viewers, you may not remember a time when there were no food banks in the UK. No collection baskets at the end of the supermarket checkout, and no shameless politician wearing a tabard begging for you to support people that they helped put in that situation in the first place. But trust me, they are relatively new in the UK. Let me explain. Food insecurity. Now, this is the awareness that food is going to be a struggle today. It's also the worry that accessing food tomorrow and in the future may also be a struggle. At an individual level, food insecurity highlights issues of access, income, and social exclusion. Now, mid-year and end-of-year figures from the UK's national network of food banks, the Trussell Trust, show that food bank use rises year on year. In addition to the data from the Trussell Trust network, there are also over 1,000 other food banks that exist outside of the Trussell Trust network. They are independent, not just independent of the Trussell Trust, but they are also independent of each other too. So we can see that food insecurity in the UK is not just a rising quantitative problem, but it's also qualitatively a problem which is rather opaque. What's worse still, neither the data that is available from independent sources nor the collective data from the Trussell Trust gets close to even calculating the true numbers of households experiencing food poverty in the UK. Now, that's because food bank use is a calculation of simply just that. Just those people who have used a food bank. Yet we know that there are many more people who will have deployed alternative strategies before they resort to the food bank, such as changing their shopping habits or changing to a lower cost supermarket or visiting family, or even, mostly from a maternal position, skipping meals to ensure that their children are fed.
Dan, this one's yours.
Oh no, not for me, thanks.
That's
no,
yours.
really.
Alright. Here. Alright.
Well, where's yours?
I had mine earlier, I'm just having a bit of fruit.
You said that yesterday and the day before.
Alright, eat up then.
Looks delicious, but you know.
It's also important not to simply reduce food poverty to a numerical value, as behind these figures there are people with lived experiences, and recognising this triggers the subjective awareness that food poverty is a real issue. Do you have the ability to access enough food to sustain you today, tomorrow? How about this week? Do you have the financial resources to do so? Also, is the food that you access a normal part of your diet? What we see is that food poverty can be guided by three main drivers: access, income, and social exclusion. Take access, for example. Access to food is grounded in your ability or inability to source enough food and can be linked to your location. So living in a rural locality for some may be bucolic, quite idyllic in fact. However, for others, it can be a source of insecurity, because supermarkets do not tend to have outlets in rural communities. And there are also other issues around lack of personal transport or community transport too. Now, the same can also be applied to inner city households too. Large supermarkets tend to be sited in out-of-town retail parks, while takeaways and convenience stores line residential streets, and these contribute to accessing unhealthy and unaffordable foods, and increasingly the social exclusion of good food. Issues of food insecurity also inevitably involve income, and a lack of income has been known to push households to the food bank, which have become a sudden place of refuge when income has failed to provide enough. So you see, part of your income, which is left for buying food, is usually the last part of the income which is spent. Now, what I mean by this is that from a fixed income, people tend to also have fixed outgoings too. Bills such as rent, gas, electricity, phone contract, all need to be paid, and not paying them will result in either a fine or you being disconnected. The money that is left at the end of the bill is the part which people spend on food. Now, we call this the elastic part of the budget because it grows and it shrinks depending upon how much the fixed outgoings have taken. And remember, no one will ever fine you or disconnect you for not buying food. So people prioritise where they spend their money. The food bank is a new phenomenon in this endeavour. Food banks have become a place of refuge for people struggling with food insecurity. Typically, they operate out of local churches and they provide free food to people in need. They also tend to work through a referral system where emergency food for around 3 days can be collected by people when income is low by accessing them through a third party. But it was never the welfare state that was envisaged by William Beveridge in the 1940s as part of the post-war welfare consensus. Now, this should have been a safe haven for all those who fell upon hard times. As a society, we all agreed that we would support those among us who needed help, and we created a redistributive social security system which was the right of every individual to use when they needed it. This system has been eroded and reduced almost to rubble. Bureaucracy, conditionality, and behaviouralism are inherent within its structure, and universal credit adheres to the notion that poverty is a lifestyle choice, and this justifies the imposition of a deserving and undeserving mentality which allows bureaucrats to withhold social security whenever they deem necessary. This structure sits well ideologically with a neoliberal position. But it's important to understand that life is not so structured. Life is movable. Things change. The structure of the current welfare system is one which is built upon means testing, stigmatising and demonising users. It is also at the heart of food insecurity and food bank growth because of that very reason. Time and time again, issues with universal credit are cited as large contributors to food bank use. The neoliberal system of carrot and stick, means testing, monitoring, behaviouralism, combined with a ruthless sanctioning regime, aims to cut off the supply of much needed social security income for vulnerable households. Sanctioning has become the reason enough to reduce or remove or delay access to financial support. To put it simply, the government restricts people's access to food by sanctioning their income, and by doing so they fail to recognise the right to food enshrined in the 1976 International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Sanctions are the removal of the welfare safety net, and the food bank unfortunately arrives to fill this void. As a charitable body, mainly delivered through religious organisations, a food bank would never let anyone go hungry. This may seem great on the surface. The immediate food insecurity problem is solved. However, these types of charitable endeavours facilitate a neoliberal government's rolling back of the welfare state. And once you've let the food bank genie out of the bottle, you can never put it back in. And unfortunately, the food bank becomes a permanent part of our high street. If you'd like to hear more about how we can end food poverty, and if you have the desire to close every single food bank in the UK, head over to my website at povertyresearch.co.uk, where you can read my academic work on this subject. Or you could also subscribe to this channel for more videos just like this one.